All right, we are now in part 2 of our Linux Fundamentals series that was a part of the CySec 101, Cybersecurity 101 pathway of TryHackMe. And in the last video, we went through some very basic commands. We went through the history of Linux and just some really basic structures for operators and running commands operating with the file system or navigating the file system. And today we're going to be going through a little bit more advanced stuff. So we're not going through, again, this is still considered a Linux fundamentals video. So we're not going to be going through anything crazy, but we will be going through some basic scripting. We're going to be going through more navigations inside of the file system. And we're even going to talk about SSH, which means secure shell, and secure shelling into the Linux machine to be able to run everything that we need to run. So this is a build-up to the Linux Plus certification training series that's going to be coming out in a few weeks. And this is by no means meant to replace anything that happens in the Linux Plus certification. This is mostly to help you kind of familiarize yourself with Linux so that the Linux Plus certification series will help you pick up where these videos leave off. And I think it'll be an exciting series of weeks that are going to come up, especially for people who are interested in getting more of an advanced skill set in Linux. That being said, our introduction to this particular room essentially says that we're going to unlock the potential of the few commands by using flags and arguments. We're going to go through the advanced knowledge of the file system to be able to do something like copy and move files, which we kind of already talked about in the last video, the fundamentals video, and then how to access files and folders and how access to them is managed and how we can determine our access and run the first few scripts and executables. So should be pretty exciting and very much ready to get into it. In the last video that we ran, we actually used the in-browser functionality to access the Linux machine. So we literally, all we had to do was click this green start machine button and the machine was up and running and we can run commands inside of the shell, inside of the command line. In this particular case, we need to use secure shell to connect to that machine. So I've already clicked the start machine button, but in this particular case, it didn't open up the terminal that we were looking for. So what you see on the right hand side right here is actually the attack box that comes with Linux, with TryHackMe rooms. So a lot of TryHackMe rooms can get access to the attack box, which is essentially another Ubuntu Linux machine that allows you to run a lot of really cool tools for cybersecurity and pen testing. But it's a Kali Linux machine, and it's something that has a graphic user interface, as you can see right here. And this is not in particular the machine that we're going to be accessing. One of the ways that you can find out which one you're supposed to be accessing is the IP addresses. So we see that the target IP address is the 81164, and the attack box IP address is 112.100. So in many of the rooms inside of TryHackMe, there's going to be a victim machine or a target machine, so to speak. There's going to be a target machine, and there's going to be the attack box machine. And in this particular case, that's what we have. So what we need to do is we need to secure shell into the target machine. And secure shell is actually very simple. So you just open up your command line and you run the command SSH, which stands for secure shell. And SSH runs on port 22. This is a little bit networking fundamentals here. So we actually have the breakdown over here as well. So it says it's a common means of connecting to and interacting with command line of a remote Linux machine. While deploying it, you will be running these two machines, which we already talked about. And essentially what it does is that our computer, so in this particular case is going to be the attack box, our computer will go through the internet, it'll encrypt our communication, and it'll connect to the Linux server through that encrypted communication and allow us to do what we need to do with the shell, with the command line terminal of that Linux machine. So we can actually execute commands on on another device completely and remotely, and any data that's sent is encrypted, meaning nobody will be able to read what you're doing, right? So if I send my username and password, which is what I'm about to do, right, I have to actually send the username and password to connect to this target machine right here. So once I do that, that should be encrypted, which is very, very important. So in this particular case, the username and password for us is going to be TryHackMe, or at least the username, excuse me, is going to be TryHackMe at the IP address of the target machine, and that's how we run it. And then the password is also TryHackMe. So it's not a very complicated username and password. But the way that that looks, right? So I'm just going to copy this IP address so we can see that this is the IP address of our attack box machine. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to connect to TryHackMe, the user, at this specific IP address, which is the IP address of the target machine, and that's all I want to do. So I'm just going to do SSH to that user at that IP address, press enter, and it's going to say, hey, are you sure you want to do this? We're going to create this encrypted fingerprint. And it's like, yeah, I do want to do that. So I'm going to press yes, and now it's going to ask me for the password of that user, which is going to be TryHackMe as well. And then a couple of seconds later, and I am now officially inside of the command line of that target machine. So you can also tell that it worked by getting the new command line. You can also see that it's listing all of the details of that Linux machine. And usually when it doesn't work, it just says password incorrect. So you'll know that it didn't work, but it officially worked. So it's actually working. And now we're inside of the target Linux machine. All right, so similar to the last video that we had, I'm going to open this up in a full screen format so we can just navigate back and forth much easier between our instructions and the actual machines that we have. And these are the series of commands that we're going to be running and the explanations for them. So I'm going to open this up in a new window. I actually have it opened up inside my second window, inside my second monitor. So I'm just going to use this machine itself, and then we're going to run all of our commands inside of this box and then get the results that we need to get, right? So from the previous video, if you remember, clear will clear our screen for us so we can access all the contents or read the contents much easier. And from here, we're going to be running our series of commands. So the very first command, and this was also a command that we covered in the last video, the command itself is ls, and it lists the items that are inside of your directory. So I always start with figuring out my working directory. So Pt.2 will print your working directory, and I'm inside of the home TryHackMe. The next one is ls. So what is inside of this directory? And then we see these visible files. Now what we want to do, this is one of the options, one of the arguments that we can run to figure out what is hidden inside of this directory. And you run that, and then all of a sudden you see that there's these other these other documents or these other script files. There's some other documents and files that exist inside of our folder, and there's actually also a hidden folder. This .cache is actually another directory that we can go into. Now, if you want to look at it in a much more user-friendly way, you can just add the L, so it kind of turns it into a list format, which just goes vertically, and then now you have each item, and then you also have some extra details about it. So for example, the date of the creation or the date of the last use, the username or the user group that it belongs to, and the permissions that are assigned to each one of these items. So this is actually a much more user-friendly way to view the data that would be shown on our ls command, right? So now we have ls-a, which is one of the parameters or arguments, I guess we can call it. It's one of the arguments. I also call it just an option. So it's one of the options that you can run with that individual command. But ls by itself has so many other options that you can access. So the way that we can do that is by doing ls-h, or you can even do --help. Either of those will work. And then you get access to the entire help menu of the command ls. And this actually applies to pretty much every other command that is available as well. And another way that we can do this is by doing the man abbreviation. So clear the screen here. I can do ls man, or man ls technically. So I should say man ls, let's see. So you do man ls instead of ls man, and it gives you again the help menu, and you can go through all of these things, and then you can either scroll down with your mouse, or you can also just do the down arrow on your keyboard, and it'll take you line by line through each one of the items inside of this menu. But the key difference here is that in order for me to get out of this, I need to actually press Q to exit the manual page, and then it'll takes me back to this particular case. Whereas when I did ls-h before, or excuse me, ls help, when I did that, I was already, it just prints everything onto the screen, and at the bottom right here, I already have my command line back, so I don't need to queue, I don't need to quit out of the manual page. I can just clear my screen and everything will be all good. But either one of those two, so ls-help or man ls, will both get you the manual page and the help page for the command ls. And that typically works with all of the other commands that come with inside of Linux anyway. Every command, or every tool, even every tool that you download and install, every package that you download and install, there is usually a manual page that's associated with it, or a help page that's associated with it. Some of the tools have -h being the access that you can get to the help screen. Some of the tools have --help, but both represent the same thing. My favorite way is to just do man for manual and then run the command. So man grep, for example, will give me the manual page for the grep command, right? So this is a very, very useful approach, especially if you haven't worked with a tool before and you just want to know what the options are and what you can run, what are the arguments that you can run, what are the various tests that you can run, so on and so forth. So that's how you access the manual for any given command, or the help screen for any given command. That being said, we have a few questions for this particular section that it basically says, explore the manual page of the ls command. What directional arrow key would you use to navigate the manual page? And you just press down on it. And what flag would you use to display the output in a human readable way? And that would be the -h, which is for help or human. So that is what we can do in that regard. All right, moving on to interacting with our file system. So we've already covered some of these very base ones that we have. We have ls to list the contents of the directory that you're in. You have find, which we ran in the last video, to find any particular file or folder by its name. And then we have cd for changing the directories. And now we have the full list. I mean, I don't think this is actually the full list either, but this is some of the more other commonly used commands that you will run to interact with the file system. So you have touch, which again stands for touch, but what it does is it creates a file. mkdir stands for make directory, and that creates a folder or a directory. cp stands for copy, and it'll copy a file or a folder into a new location. mv stands for move, and it'll do the same thing. It won't copy it, but it'll actually move the file or folder into whatever location you designate. rm stands for remove, and that'll remove a file or a folder. And then we have file, which actually just gives you the type of a file. So sometimes that's also very useful. You need to determine what type of a file you're dealing with, and based on the type, you know how to interact with that file. So one of the pro tips right here, similarly to using cat, we can provide full file paths. So directory 1, directory 2, note for all of these commands, right? So you can say touch and then give a full file path to create that file in that particular pathway. And then same thing with the rest of these things. All of these things can work with a full path to create or remove or copy inside of that given path that you want it to do. So that we have as our list of commands. So now what we can do is we can run these commands and have some fun with this particular directory that we're in, or this machine that we're in. So let us do the very, very, very first piece, which is to create a file, right? So to create a file, you just run touch, right? So I already know that let me zoom in a little bit more. I already know that I'm inside of the basic working directory, the home of this TryHackMe user. And I already know that if I run ls, I have these, important, or these mostly used documents, right? Easily accessible documents, I guess I should say. These are the easily accessible documents, and I also have these hidden documents as well. So that's where we are with our specific directory. So this is our current directory. These are the contents of our current directory. So what I want to do now is I want to create a new file, right? So I can say touch note, and now I've created a file. I can do lsl again, and now I see I have a file here, note, right? If I do cat note, there's nothing in it, so nothing is going to print onto the screen for me because it's literally an empty file. Now if I do file note, it'll say it's a note and it's empty, right? So that's essentially how you can determine what type of file you have. Now notice that we didn't assign an extension to it. So if I do touch note.txt, it'll create a note.txt, which is separate from this original note. It didn't replace it. And if I do file note.txt, it'll say note.txt is empty and there's nothing in it, but it gives us that .txt file, right? We can now use make dir, make directory, to create a new directory, and I'll just call it dir1 for our case, and then we can do lsl, and now we can see we have a directory called dir1. And now the contents of our current directory, our working directory, have changed, and we have these two notes that we have over here, these two files that we created using touch, and then we have this directory. So let's say I want to kind of clean up this current directory that I'm in. I can use move, right? I can use move, and I can use move to move the note file into dir1. And so this is something that we did in our last video. You can kind of chain commands together. I can also use move to move this particular thing into dir1 as well. And now I press enter. And now if I run lsl, we'll see that those two files are gone. But I can now go into the dir1 directory and run ls, and I can see that they're inside of the new directory, right? So you can chain those commands together. So I created a new directory, I created a couple of files, and I moved those files into this new directory that we have over here, which is our dir1 directory, right? So now I'm done using these files that I've created here. I'm done using that note and the note.txt. So I'm going to remove them. So I'm going to do rm to remove, and I'm going to remove note. And then if I do lsl, we'll see that note is gone. We just removed it, right? Very, very easy, like super, super easy. There's something called the -r, the $R switch, or the $R option, argument, so on and so forth, that you need to do to remove a directory, right? So if I go back one here, and I'm now inside of this main directory again, and I see that I have that cd, that dir1 directory. So what I want to do is I want to remove that. So I need to do -r and then do dir1. And now that directory is also removed, as well as everything that's inside of that directory. So it literally just deletes the directory and anything that's inside of it. So if you want to remove a directory, you can still use remove, but you can do -r, the $R switch, and it will remove the directory, and then just remove by itself will remove whatever the file name is that you designate after it. So now let's play around with copy and move. So cp and move. So in this particular case, I'm going to create the file again. So I'm going to create a note, and now we have the note that's inside of our current directory. And what we want to do is we want to copy this note for whatever reason. So I can just do cp note. So that's the first option that you give it. You give it the current file, and then you give it the name of the new file. So note2 would be the new file. And now I should have two of them, right? So I have note, and then I have the contents, or the copy of that note, and everything that's inside of it has been now copied, and it's inside of note2. So let's say I want to now rename note2 for whatever case. So I can rename it by using the MV. So MV actually moves a file to a new location, but it can also be used to rename the file. So I can do MV note2 and I can change it to note3. And now if I do LSL, we'll see that we have the original note and then the new note has been renamed to note3. If I created a directory called Directory2 and I wanted to move note3, I can move it to Directory2. And then, or excuse me, I should just do note3 and then do Directory2. And then there you go. There's no / required for that. Now that I've done this, if I do LSL, we can see that the original note is still here. And then we need to go into the dir2 to find that we actually have the new file that we created is sitting inside of the new directory that we made, right? So you can use move to move a file, and you can use move to rename a file. Now here's another cool little note for you. So in our original directory, we have the note, right? So let's say now I want to create a copy of this note and I want to move it to dir2, but I don't have a name, right? I can technically just say I want to copy this and I want to move that copy into dir2 and I want to rename it as note4, and I press enter and I go into dir2, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to ls the stuff that's inside of dir2 just to kind of, how is there no file or directory? We literally have dir2 right there. Oh, I'm already inside of dir2. My bad. Whoops. So we'll just do ls and we're already here. So there you go. So we have moved the file, right? So if I go back one, and let's just clear this up. So now I'm inside of the basic directory that we were at, and we have the note originally inside of here. And then what I did was I used copy to take that note and copy it inside of the dir2 directory. So inside of the dir2 directory, now I have the original note that I copied and I moved in here using MV. But then this piece right here, this one right here, was actually put inside of this directory using CP. So you can use CP to just place it in the location that you want to place it, or if you create it in that same directory, you can just move it using MV. And then once I'm here, I can just do, MV note4 and I can rename it to note7, whatever. And then you do that and then it renames the file for you, right? So CP can copy a file and take it from the current location to a new location, or you can use MV to move it to that location. And then you can also use MV to rename a file without doing any other modifications, so you just rename it, right? So in this particular case, the final command that we have here is the file command that's supposed to just give us some kind of notification about what type of file we're dealing with. So in this case, note7 is empty, so there's nothing in it. So I can just do hello world. We'll just do this inside of note7. And now if we do file note7, we should actually have something, right? So it says it's a text file, right? ASCII, I call it AC. It's an AC text file. Now we can actually get the type of file. If it's empty, it'll just say it's empty. But if you put something in it, then you'll be able to get that it's some kind of a text file. And then same thing would apply if it was a .txt extension at the end of it. So note7 is the one that we actually just put the documents into it, from what I understand. So let me see, cat note7. Yeah, that's the one that we put the text into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change note3 from note3 to note3.txt, right? And so now I have a .txt at the end of it. But if I do file for note3.txt, it'll still say that it's empty. So there's nothing in it. So if I now echo hello user into that particular file, then we do file note3.txt, and we will actually get that it's still an ac.text file or AC text file. So the extension itself doesn't necessarily matter of what the file type would be. It's the contents of it, right? So this is what's kind of good to keep in mind for future reference. The contents of the file will determine the file type that you get, not necessarily the extension of the file. So just keep that piece in mind as we progress through the rest of the tasks and the rest of the videos, because that is the ultimate determining factor of what type of file you're dealing with. So we've gone through all of the commands here, and let's go through the question. So it says, how would you create a file named new note? And you just do it by using touch new note. On the deployable machine, what is the file type of unknown one in the TryHackMe's home directory? So let's actually go do that. So we have the home directory that we got to go into, and inside of the home directory we have the unknown one. So I'll just do file unknown one, and then we see that it's an AC text file. Very good. And it says, how would we move the file my file to the directory my folder? And we have that over here. So we've done this multiple times. You would first do MV, you do the file name, and then you give it the location that you want it to move to. What are the contents of this file? So the my file is the content that we're looking for, and this is the file that we have over here. So we can just do cat, so to concatenate that, and we do cat my file, and it gives us the flag, which is THM file system. And to continue to apply the knowledge and practice the commands, no answer needed, and we will definitely continue to apply this knowledge. So moving on to our next task here, which is the permissions. So now let's talk about file permissions. All right, so we've actually gone through a few commands, not on this particular video, but in the last video, where there were some files that we could not get access to, or certain folders that we can't get access to. So permissions are a big deal. And as we go into the Linux Plus certification video, we'll be talking about permissions and security in depth. But it's a concept that you should be very familiar with. And I think just in general, you should be familiar with this concept of, yeah, there are certain files you just don't have access to. There are certain folders you don't have access to. A user will not have access to the files and folders that belong to the administrator because of the permissions that have been set on the administrator's files and folders. So there's a lot of things that permissions covers, right? It's like a big concept. So when we do LSL, which we've ran multiple times, there's this first portion right here for every single line item that actually tells us what the permissions are associated with each one of these files. And what you can see is that there's a dash, there's a R, there's a W, and then a dash, and then a couple of dashes and a couple of dashes. So the dashes are placeholders for the permissions that are not there. And typically, those permissions would be read, write, and execute. And read would be the R, W would be the write, and then X, the letter X, would be the execute permission. So if we switched to a user that actually had those permissions, and in this case we're going to actually do it, we'll run those same commands and we'll see that the file permissions will be updated according to that user's permission level, right? So in the initial screenshot that we had right here, the CMNATIC file, right? So that was the original user that was created in this particular case. If we go to user 2, that it has, so it says it has the indicator of the dash highlighting that it's a file, and then the RW followed after this means that only the owner of the file can read and write the CMNATIC PEM file, but cannot execute it, right? So the differences between users and groups, briefly, is that permissions can be so granular that while a user technically owns a file, if the permission has been set, then a group of users can also have either the same or different set of permissions to that same exact file without affecting the file owner itself, right? So the permissions of the owner may not necessarily translate to a group that has been designed for, and vice versa, right? We can put this in a real world context. So the system user that runs a web server must have permissions to read and write files for an effective web application. However, companies like the web hosting companies will want to allow their customers to upload their own files for their website without being the web server system user, compromising the security of every other customer. So that means what? That means the web hosting company should allow each of their users to actually be able to upload files and folders into their individual web servers, but the user should not be able to access the web hosting company's files and servers And vice versa. Because of privacy reasons, the web hosting company should not be able to access the files and folders of each individual user, especially if it's a web server and all of these various types of service-based web servers that you would be using to create customer lists and create your products and services and proprietary information. They should not be able to access it. If you have intellectual property that's hosted on your web server, Google Cloud should not be able to access your intellectual property and then steal your intellectual property and create their own version of it. You know what I mean? That it just shouldn't happen. So it's a very granular, as the word was used. It's a very granular system, meaning that it's nuanced, and the permissions can be very, very specific according to groups and ownership and people creating and uploading files, so on and so forth. So switching between users is done through the su command. Unless you're the root user or using root permissions through sudo, then you're required to know the password of that person, so as well as the username, obviously. So you need to know the user that you want to switch to, and then you need to know the user's password, unless you're the root user. If you're the root user, you can essentially do that change without having the password. The su command takes a couple of switches that may be of relevance. So for example, executing command once you log in or specifying a specific shell to use. We can read the manual page for su to find out more information, but we're going to go through this specific portion right here, which is the L or the login switches. By providing L, we'll start a shell that's more and more similar to the actual user logging into the system. We inherit a lot more of the properties of the new user, for example, the environment variables and everything else. So you do su, and then the user, you give them the password. When we use su to switch to user 2, the new session drops us into the previous user's home directory. So in this particular case, we can see that we're inside of the home user 2 directory. And after that, if we use L to the new, our new session has dropped us into the home directory of the user automatically, right? So if we go here, for example, we can see that in this particular case, this was the user. So I kind of read through that quickly. So let me kind of brief over that. The user here is TryHackMe. The TryHackMe user switched to user 2. While we're signed in to user 2, we're still in the home directory of TryHackMe. However, when you use su and then you use the L option or the L argument, you go from user of TryHackMe into user of user 2, but now you're also inside of the home directory of user 2. So the L option will take you into that specific user's home directory, while just doing su and the username will keep you wherever you were when you ran that command. So on the deployable machine, who's the owner of important? So let's go ahead and check this whole stuff out right here. So on our machine here, what we want to do is we want to find some of the owners and permissions and everything else. So first and foremost, let's look at the ownership of the file important. And so we will do that with lsl, and we got that. And then the important file is used and created by user 2. So what would be the command to switch to that user? And in this particular case, is going to be su user 2, right? The password itself is user 2 as well. So I'm going to do the L flag just to make sure that we actually switch there. The password is user 2. And now we're inside of their home directory like that. So we can clear this up now. So it says the first question was who's the owner of important, and it's user 2. The next question is what would be the command to switch to that user, which is the su user 2. Now switch to them using the password user 2, which we already did. And now we have important, which is the contents of that file itself. So if I do ls, there's nothing inside of this thing. So actually, I shouldn't have ran the L command. Notice that, right? Because the contents of that specific directory that we were looking at was not the user 2's home folder. It was TryHackMe's home folder. So what we need to do now is we need to navigate backwards and go into the TryHackMe user. And in this case, we now have the important file here. So now I can go ahead and do cat of the important file and get the content of it. So sometimes you don't need to do all this extra things to be fancy, because it makes you do more work just like what happened right now. So you don't have to use the L command when you're doing this switch user, because it will take you to the home folder of that specific user when the file that we needed to access for that final question was technically inside of the home folder of TryHackMe. So that is all of the questions that we have for our permissions portion of this particular room. So let's move into the common directories here. One of the most important directories that you will run across when you go through pen testing and security is the etc directory. The etc directory holds a lot of the commonplace, or we can call it actually configuration files. There is a lot of important configuration files that reside within the etc directory, and as the acronym implies, it stands for etc. And so system files are here, and these are very, very important system files. Two of the most important system files, for example, are going to be the password and the shadow files. Now, contrary to their name, the password file does not store passwords. It stores usernames. The shadow file stores the hashes of all of those users' passwords. So you still won't see plain text passwords inside of the shadow file, but you will at least have the hashes of those passwords. And if you have a decent rainbow table, or if you have a decent tool, you can reverse engineer the hash of that specific password and get the clear text version of the password. If you know how to pass the hash, then you can use pass the hash tactics to use the hash value to log in as a particular user instead of using the clear text version of those passwords. So it's very, very important. These two particular configuration files are very, very important because they store all of our usernames and passwords for that specific system. So if we went inside of the etc folder in this particular case, and if we ran the list command, we can see that the shadow file is here, password file is here. There's a list of all of our sudo users. So these are all the people that have sudo permissions, which is also known as root permissions. And there's the sudoers d file, which I believe is just a directory or a database type of a file that is associated with that list of sudoers. Then we have the var directory, var, however you want to pronounce it. It stands for variable data. So this is dynamic data, and dynamic data means data that's changing consistently. And one of those things is logs, right? So if we actually go inside of the var directory, we can find a log directory, and inside of the log directory, you'll have a bunch of different log files, and those log files are constantly changing because they're always being updated with new log items. And then you can also have an optional directory that's inside of the var directory and a temp folder that's inside of the var directory. These are not to be confused with the actual optional and temp folders that are inside of the root directory. So it would be a /tmp. That would be the actual root portion of the temp files. And these belong to specifically the one that are inside of the var directory. And of course, as you can see, backups are also in here, which would be, you could have regularly scheduled backups that would take place that would also be contained inside of this particular folder. And all of this file falls under variable data, or data that is dynamic and it's being constantly changed, frequently accessed, or written. That's essentially what the purpose of the contents of this particular directory are. And then we have the root directory. So this is not the home directory. So when you go inside of the root folder, so I'll actually show you this because I think it's easier to notice what's going on here. So if we go backwards inside of the root folder, so if I went to the very, very root, notice how home has been removed and TryHackMe has been removed, and we only have this / right here. That means we're currently inside of the root directory, and when you do pwd, it literally just gives you that /. Once I do ls, we can see that all of these other important directories are here. One of them is the home directory, and that contains all of the individual home containers for each individual user, right? So if I go inside of the home directory and list it, we can see that we have these various users, and for each one of these various users, there's going to be individual files in here. So you can see that inside of TryHackMe's home directory, there is all this information, and then inside of user 2, we already saw that there was nothing in there. So going back into the root folder, we can see that we have the optional directory in here. That was also one of the things that was inside of the var directory at the end. We also have the temp folder that was also inside of the var directory. We also have the root directory that we just talked about right here, and that was a really, really important one as well. So if we go inside of root, we can see that there's been denied permission here. So if I try to do cd with, do sudo, so if I do sudo cd root, I'll be asked for a permission or a password for that. And if user 2 is not in the sudoers file, this will be reported to whoever the system administrator is, because we're trying to access the root folder without actually being somebody on the sudoers file inside of the home or inside of the root or the sudoers list, right? So if I switch back to TryHackMe, then I will have to provide TryHackMe's password, and I'm now here, and I'm now back again inside of this particular root folder as well. So if I try to now change into the root directory, I don't know if TryHackMe he doesn't have access to that either. So TryHackMe user is not in the sudoers file either, and that has now also been reported to the system administrator, right? So the root folder is a very, very important folder, because it is not the home folder for the root, or it's not similar to the home folder in any way where you can access whatever user information in there. It is only accessible by somebody who's either in the sudoers file or is the actual root user, the main user. So it's very important to understand, right? So this is not the same. This is not the home directory. The root folder is actually the home for the root system user. There isn't anything more to this folder other than just understanding that this is the home of the root user. But it is worth to mention, because the logical presumption is that this user would have their data in a directory such as home root by default, right? They get their very own directory inside of the root folder. We have the temp directory. So it's a unique root directory found on a Linux install. It's for temporary files, and it's volatile, and it's used to store data that is only needed to be accessed once or twice. Typically, it gets wiped every time the system is restarted. So similar to the memory on your computer, once the computer is restarted, the contents are cleared out. What's useful for us in pen testing is that any user can write to this folder by default. So keep that in mind, right? Most of the pen testing exercises that we've ever done on this particular channel have had to do with the temp folder, because even the lowest user with no privileges can access that temp folder and write something in there, right? Meaning once we have access to a machine, it serves as a good place to store things like enumeration scripts, because we can actually write into this, and then in there you can have a number of items that will most likely you'll be able to run and write to, simply because of the fact that it's the temporary folder. So it's a very, very important one. And then when you look at it from the perspective of a system administrator or security officer, that's something to be aware of, that if somebody gets into your system, they can run stuff from the temp folder. So the temp folder should be watched closely, and it's a very, very important folder. The questions here. So what is the directory path that we would expect logs to be stored in, which is inside of the variable directory, and we have the log directory, and it has all of the log files. So let's actually go in here. Let's see if we can access it. So if I go into var, we have the log file right here. That's over here, and I should be able to see, cd log, and we are actually inside of it, and now we can see all of the log files that are over here. So there's the authentication log, and then there's the depackaging log, there's the sys log, and a variety of other logs that are also very important. So let's see. Next question. What root directory is similar to how RAM on a computer works because it gets wiped? So random access memory gets wiped on reboot, and that is very similar to the TMP, the temporary directory. Name the home directory for the root user, which we already know is the root directory. And now we can navigate through these directories on the Linux machine, which we've done already. So feel free to do the same thing for yourself and have some fun with it. So let's go into the conclusion here. All right, so what we have covered in this particular room, we learned how to secure shell into a Linux machine and using the basic SSH command. That was very, very easy. Advancing your use of commands by providing flag switches and where you can go to learn about these things. For example, the manual page or the help page for each one of those commands. Some more commands that you'll frequently be using to interact with the file system. For example, finding the hidden files or listing items inside of any given directory, cleanly looking at the permissions of those particular files or the users that created those files. All of those can be done with the same exact command, which is LSL, with the ls with the -l option. A brief introduction to file permissions and switching users, which we did beautifully, and summary paragraph of the important root directories on an Ubuntu install and how we may be able to use the data stored within those. And that was everything that we found inside of this root directory right here that gives us access to all of these other directories here, which could be the user directory. You have the binaries directory. There is the system binaries directory, the sbin directory. So all of these things are very, very important directories. We'll be covering these in depth as we go into the Linux Plus certification course that is going to be coming up in the upcoming weeks. So it's going to be pretty exciting to go through. And we have one more video left, or one room left, for the Linux fundamentals, which is going to be Linux Fundamentals Part 3. And to be updated so that you can get access to that particular video as it drops, I do encourage you to like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell so that you get notified the next time that a video comes out, especially on this Cybersecurity 101 pathway that we're on. And there's a lot of stuff that is going to be dropped because that's actually a big pathway because it covers a lot of fundamentals and a lot of information that is important to people who are just starting out. So that's the main reason why we started this particular CySec 101 pathway. And there's going to be other advanced videos that are going to come out as well. For example, everything that we're doing for SOC Level 1 exercises, and then continuing on to SOC Level 2. And then, of course, the Linux Plus certification for CompTIA. That massive video that's going to come out is going to be massive freaking video. It's probably going to be 2 videos because the maximum upload time is 12 hours on a tutorial. So if I can cram it into one giant video that's less than 12 hours, I'll probably try to do that. But I think it's going to end up being more than 12 hours. So it's going to be a 2-parter. And it's going to be a really, really, really powerful, useful video because we're going to go in depth into Linux. So if you aren't familiar with it, this is why we're doing the Linux Fundamentals series right now, so that when you go into that video, you'll at least have a good understanding of the basics. So make sure that you like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so that you get notified that when that video comes out. And of course, drop a comment, if you have anything to say, if you want to show appreciation, if you just want to say hi, if you have any questions, drop a comment and let me know what's up. I do respond to all of the comments that come in, and if it's a really good question, I will create a video in response to your question and you will get a shout out, just like Darnell Knight has gotten a shout out pretty much for every video that's come out for the CySec 101 series, because he was the reason why I started the CySec 101 series. So yeah, definitely let me know. And that's about it. That's all I got for those specific announcements. I do have to give a shout out to the Hackaholics Anonymous community, the #1, the premier community for cybersecurity and hacking. And this is actually something that I'm very, very excited about. Our members are amazing people. We have 4 tiers. Even the most basic tier, which is the supporter tier, gets their own Discord channel from now on. And you get access to me individually. You can ask me whatever questions you want. You get access to all of our advanced members as well. So you can drop a question in there and people are very responsive. They're very, very supportive. And it's one of those things that If you're going along this journey and you want somebody to be there with you along this journey, that would be a great place to be. And if you have all these questions that you may not necessarily want to drop them in the comment section, that's a great place to be. If you want to join the advanced tiers, for example, cyber agents and cyber supporters and cyber masters, if you want to join any of those, you will get Python automations every single month. You get exclusive downloads, exclusive content. There's individual systems or servers, for Discord that is assigned to those people. So there's a lot of great information that is available to those particular individuals, and a lot of great perks that are available to every single one of the tiers that we have. So if you haven't checked it out already, I do encourage you to check out the Hackaholics Anonymous membership community, the premier YouTube community for cybersecurity and hacking. It's your boy Hank Hackerson at Hank Hacks Hackers, your favorite network and system attacker/protector. Love, peace, and chicken grease. If no one else loves you, Hank loves you, and I'll see you in the next video later.